what I took, and I'm going to talk about my personal experience of having eclipses on my first house and seventh house axis. So I have a Pisces ascendant, and as a Pisces ascendant, my Jupiter and Neptune are both in whole sign 11th house, and whole sign 11th house, for me that's Capricorn. Both so both of them are retrograde, and the years I had eclipses on my on that axis, I remember 2006, 2016, if I'm not mistaken, or 2015. Um, what I remember about them was that I was um, I was tending to certain in my personality, especially my gender. I was exploring actually the feminine aspect of my gender on both eclipses. Kind of questioning what kind of a woman I am and looking into the feminine. I was also willing to change my perception about relationships. That's perhaps the seventh house. And the ruler of my seventh is Mercury. So Mercury rules our processes, our thoughts, basically. Not only that, of course. And these eclipses were kind of, I was really exploring genuinely the kind of woman that I am. So in 2006, I was exploring that through music. And in 2016, through Venusian aspects as well, through clothing. Um, and both cases confronted me with certain um, issues to do with relationship dynamics that were neat. So 2016 was a pre-Me Too case in my academia, and 2006, later to 2007, where um, funnily enough, I ran into a person with whom I had a very unhealthy dynamic. And both of these they had a relation to identity because both these people were trying to affect the personality of another person. Uh, or trying to use like mind control or something like that. But this, of course, the ruler of my seventh house is opposing Pluto. So the ruler of my seventh house is Mercury. It's in a Mars world sign in Aries, and it is opposing Pluto. Um, and Pluto about power, and Mercury is also the thoughts. So can be arguments. My Pluto is in ninth. Um, around worldview, or one person tries to get the other to believe in their worldview, um, or even trying to be patient about it, but there is a worldview issue, worldview discord, a worldview. But this is a worldview that sometimes need to be changed. For example, in 2016, it was a pre-Me Too case. And what was special about it was that I was trying to avoid any sort of conflict, any sort of opinions, because I was looking to explore who I am and looking to explore how do I enjoy being a woman. So I was absolutely not looking to be an actor. But the ruler of my ascendants, both of them are in the 11th house, the house of goals and dreams. And both these times, there was something that another goal, another mission, another life mission that needed the attention. So 2016, I was in the academia, and the thesis proposal I was doing had to do with medicine. And I was very much into metaphysics and the kind of body-mind relation of all kinds of physical phenomena, of medical conditions. Um, was exposed through a relationship coach. I had a friend who was a relationship coach, and she was into all this manifestation and Abraham Hicks, and I said, "Oh, I'll try it." And she also introduced me to Louise Hay, whom I've heard nothing of, and I was fascinated. For it was a whole new field of knowledge. Like, oh, this ailment has to do with this. Let's say you have something. Let's say you're sneezing a lot. So that's third eye. I have no idea what am I doing or if it's even beautiful. I like this color, the orange and the yellow, and there's like the remnants of the previous drawing of the red. This seems like I will need to add something here, but let's take it here. I'm just blending colors. That's more nicely blended. I was hoping that these two will have a bit more contrast. The two greens. Yeah, and that. Oh, that already is a very rich blend here. So, so it was very interesting. I had a friend, okay, a friend, and again, 11th house is also friends, um, who was doing relationship coaching. She was practicing to be a relationship coach, and she said she was looking for people to work with. And I said, "Oh, come on, I am a case. I am a case." Um, and then we were like exploring this issue and just became friends. And she introduced me to Louise Hay. So I was curious about that. And eventually, after both cases, after 2007, um, it will take time, but there was something about my goal. I was not willing to give up studies because I had studied filmmaking and English literature, and then I ran out of money. Um, but I was not willing to give up, studies. And I was also considering what kind of studies do I want? What if I'll do that? Hmm. Okay. Um, very smooth. I have no idea what I'm doing. So, um, so it would still be difficult for me, but I was exposed to the idea in 2007. I was exposed to the concept that the person that I had this very unhealthy dynamic with knew um, how to have a healthy model of relationships. And I realized that, studies is not just the mind, but it's also our psychology. And I felt very desperate because I was very confident in my ability to study, like academics, or unless it was computation, but unless it was like trying to do simple calculations. That's something that I usually have mistakes with. But other than that, this drawing seems like this is not related to this. But I did like that a lot. Let's just wait for it to dry a bit. Um, so, other than computation, I had confidence about being able to learn just about anything. A lot of curiosity. So I was never afraid if I have to learn something new. It didn't scare me. Also, when I eventually landed in academia, and from politics and philosophy of science, and then I was looking at the case of psychiatry because I ran into it through an essay I was doing in the end of my first degree regarding colonialism. So there was colonialism in psychiatry. And I was like, gee, in science, it was not like Kuhn. In science, it was, with the psychiatry, it was like it was an invented science. And then there were rumors of there being new way of healing, of addressing crisis. And that gave root to funding, which was actually used to overpower people. So there were rumors. So, for example, in Britain, people were saying, why don't we get good treatment like in India? And then they invest abroad. But in India, you would find out that your people are not actually being treated. It was just another way of, you know, psychologically controlling people or just imprisoning them. Um, so then I was like, oh wow. And later we had all science developed as psychiatry. Whether you agree with that or not, or you agree with psychiatry being scientific or not. Um, and the next phase in my thesis, I was looking to study, politics and governance, politics and science, and from the perspective of philosophy of science, and kind of see the relations. And I was taking on Feyerabend's approach as philosophy of science, and Feyerabend literally says, when he said anything goes, it's not anything goes in terms of scientific method. It just means that there is no method that can predict the next scientific what will advance humanity. And the greatest scientific revolutions were not, in the same method that people expected them to be. Sometimes it was even a new method. But you could not predict what will bring a scientific breakthrough. And it's very difficult when you think about it. And my instructor was an MD. He said, me as an MD, he studied philosophy of science. So I read Feyerabend, and I don't know patient. So there I was taking, the medicine. I said, okay. The whole topic changed, and I said, okay, politics is one thing. Let's talk medicine. And I delved into that. So when I dealt with with what I dealt with in 2016 when I was a pre-Me Too case, I actually turned to the medicine. I turned to looking at both the historical perspective, context of those issues of sexual offenses, and mind control, and how psychological mind control is very related. It's just another form of sexual abuse. Now, in astrology, it's so obvious, Pluto is about abuse of power. So, of course, it can be a sexual abuse, it can be mind control, it can be psychic abuse. And those languages did not exist in academia. So I had to move away. And when I was, in 2006, that later led to a crisis, the 2007 crisis, I realized that, up until then, my studies were filmmaking for the sake of filmmaking, English literature to maintain my English. But then, and I was interested in psychology, but in terms of like the anomaly, or it was not a personal thing. But then it became a practical thing. and almost an activistic thing to understand what's going on is to heal, to understand what is going on with me. Now I have to study not just because I like studying. And again, the ruler of my Capricorn house is in the ninth house. Okay, so it's both Pluto that opposes the ruler of my seventh house, Mercury, from the ninth, but also Jupiter and Neptune are in Capricorn, and my Saturn is in the ninth house. So worldview plays a huge role in my in where would identity crisis take me and where would they be resolved. Um, so And another thing you have with the medicines, for example, traditional medicines, they talk about the yin and yang energy, so the feminine and masculine energy. And in terms of identity and gender, there are many ways you can see one person when they're like, okay, what if I'm a man and a woman? And sometimes this side needs more attention, sometimes this side needs more attention. But if I'm a man, I also have yin and yang inside me because it's like fractals. So all in all, if I try to um, what did these eclipses bring? They brought an identity crisis that was also a life path crisis. There was identity crisis that was a life path crisis, and it was resolved in worldview, in learning something new, in traveling. In 2007, I traveled with my family to Europe, and I was in a very difficult mental condition, sometimes to the point that I thought, oh, maybe we should go back, maybe we should go to hospital. Um, but eventually, I actually remembered the experiences of this trip for a very long time because it was emotional. I was feeling extreme emotions. So it had a deep impact on my psyche. There was actually healing. Like, from in retrospective, I have been in hospital and I've been in traveling, and traveling was way better than um, because when you travel, you also see, for example, I traveled to the country that I had that the person that I met online was living in, and I saw in the region and I saw the culture there, so I could get the context to what of the other person was just miscommunication and what was actually malicious. And to travel, you see a lot of culture, you see a lot of points of views, and this in itself is something that can be very productive. It was not an easy thing to do. We're sleeping in the car, and we have even animals with us. And we were, of course, in between homes because that's the only way we could afford to travel. It was not in any way easy. It was not in any way easy. Um, but definitely better than what I got from, let's say, my attempts with psychiatry or something like that. And in 2016, it was that I was I was working on my thesis proposal, and I kind of felt like, okay, I'm in the academy, I did a second degree, and something missing praxis. And I cannot, if I did not study anything practical, I cannot treat patients. So later I would go to study aromatherapy, and the crisis was not only in the academia; it was also when I went to therapy. So and the focus was identity, how to have like could it be that my identity has something to do with certain traumas I've had in childhood, and how do I deal with that? How do I deal with those identity parts in me, and how they operate in relations? So the child wants to be protected, the woman wants to be able to set a boundary. Okay, so if I get a situation, then a part of me wants the other person to set the boundary, and the part of me wants me to know that they can set the boundary. And and maybe the man in me has some their own like needs from those interactions. And then the therapist also like had actually a sort of an astral affair with the therapist, and then I decided to explore my non-sexual part, and things got really mad really quick. And say a tip I can tell you is when there is power relations and they say, oh, a person left, let's say the dynamic, and they're accusing the person higher in power in being, you know, whether it's sex offenses or plagiarism sometimes or whatnot. They're usually right because the person in power, they usually say that because they did not, I don't know, marry this person, then this is why they are disappointed. But what happens is that more often than not, let's say you had an affair or something like that, or even if you didn't have an affair, you had chemistry or you decide to walk away. And when you walk away from a situation, sometimes it can be like, okay, I just want to explore my, you know, my non-sexual side. Um, and then the other person gets violent, and you're like, oh, what the fuck is going on? And when, you know, when the person walks away from power, in a higher power position, then what actually happens there is that the person in power is feeling like they're losing the control. And that is why they act in this way. So it's disappointment of the other, you know, the other person, because oftentimes you don't expect much place, or if you see that, you know, for example, my rationale that I know that is not a correct one, when I was in therapy was like, okay, I will learn how to be in a certain intimate dynamic, and then I can take the healthy thing and just copy paste it. Don't forget I was doing manifestation, copy paste it and date them. So I was not planning, you know, to marry my therapist or something like that. Um, you know, I could be joking about it, but it's not something, you know. Um, but then I went and studied aromatherapy, and I actually got to treat patients. And not only I got to treat the patient, their deep closure was I got to, you know, we had in the second course, we had the psychiatrist in the course, and we would give each other like sort of, you know, treatment plans. So I basically did a treatment plan to a psychiatrist. Um, and that was a very empowering situation that you get. And I also gave him astrological reading. It was a very powerful situation, and very beautiful to see. You know, to grow in this way, but it did went through a really an identity crisis, and also because the ruler of my seventh house is also opposition in Pluto, and this is a hard aspect. And Pluto in the ninth house, so worldviews and studies. So there was a crisis. And think about these things about, you know, psychiatry and how do we treat people, or how is psychiatry used to actually sometimes, yeah, I'm not saying there are not beautiful things about helping people with mental crisis, um, but how it's sometimes actually used to say that someone is crazy if they dare to speak about something terrible that they had, and dare to speak not because they want to revenge, but because they want to heal and they want to grow. And a part is sharing and getting validation, getting acknowledgement, so you can grieve, so you can process your emotions, so you can grow from this. So and both of them, and the rulers are in the house, and the ruler of my ascendant is in the house of goals and dreams, and this is the 11th house, both rulers there. So those crises also led to me changing something about my goal, something about my dreams, what I manifest, how I manifest what I manifest. So in 2007 it was like, okay, I'm going to take, the issues of studies, and I'm going to, and then I noticed that if I would ask a question, if not necessarily ask the universe, but if I would have a question or a problem in mind, the big worldview was changing from why did it happen to me to how do I live correctly. And indeed, the person I had this violent dynamic with in 2007, it was very violated basically boundaries that I had research regarding sexuality. And I was even feeling strange about why am I feeling this way, but I realized that okay, what I've been through is, it feels close to what people who went through, let's say, incest go through, like from the literature. So let's look for therapy to people who went through that, and see if I can get benefit, if I can heal with this. Or let's look for people who went through, let's say, sexual violence, and how did they heal. And I was actually actively looking for such people, but then I attracted them to me. And like one time I even said, I call this like mental rape, like what I've been through rape, and people who didn't go through rape would say, you're using, like, you don't use this word, how dare you use this word, and you know what rape is, and so and so. And the only people who actually understood me were people who genuinely went through rape or sexual violence or incest, and how it affects like the identity, the sexuality, and whatnot. um, so all of those all of those things, I was like, whenever I try to be a woman, I ran into these issues. And not because I was trying to be a woman, because I was really on the woman's side. It was not making, pretending to be something that I'm not. It's just understanding that I have another aspect to my identity. Um, and and so the goals and dreams was also the house of activism and the change in society. And so in the beginning, people call you crazy, or they now everybody knows what is gaslighting. So much so that even if somebody says wrong, people can say like, "Oh, you're gaslighting, you're gaslighting," and they're using it correctly. But there's different degrees of gaslighting. But it's like everybody knows what's gaslighting. A lot of people are more aware of what is ritual abuse, of what is energy abuse, of what is psychic attack. I was like, the minute I learned more about psychic attack, I was like, wait, but what about people who have psychosis, like really psychosis? And then I was actually in hospital, and there were people with me who were having psychosis, and I began to speak with them. So, one person said, a deceased relative told them to do so and so because it was not okay with a certain religion that they were in. And I basically told, well, um, tell your relative that you will do that, but you will do this in a way that is safe for you, or you will save money to do that in a way that is safe for you, and not mutilate your body. And they were like, "Oh wow, you're like a doctor," and I was like, "What? I'm just speaking common sense." It was just the only thing I was doing correctly was that I was actually asking these people about what do they feel and what do they see or what were they told, and I found a certain inner logic in that. um, and that was not me being in any professional hat. It was just me being one of the commoners that I escaped to mainly after I spoke up about what happened to me in academia. But I was also genuinely looking for help. I was looking to see if there is a sort of therapy that can cope with that, or what to do. And so the whole language, the whole framing of how we speak about mental crises, about relationships, about our sexuality, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable in human behavior. All of these were they just followed, and like in the coming years. Of course, the whole thing began like Pluto went into Capricorn in 2008. And this was where I severed ties with the person that I met in 2007. And at that time, I was the crazy one. And all the tags you would get. So, and not only that, it was like a personality problem. You know, people who went through trauma, they call them either, you know, borderline. It was not just coming necessarily from society. It was just like, that was the most available or the most relatable definition is a person that can feel, you know, despair or emptiness, or can feel sometimes hopeful but very empty, very desperate, very like not in like helplessness and all of those things, um, and rage. Of course, if you went through sexual trauma, then of course you feel that. But there was no there because it happened in the astral field. There was no way to speak about it in language, and so the disease was the personality. And how destructive that can be, that, you know, today to call a personality a disease. And how, you know, and that was my way. And then, you know, I would look into borderline and I found radical acceptance. And I was like, okay, I practice radical acceptance. So what was the answer? It's radical acceptance. And then, you know, and eventually, like when my therapist fell for me or whatnot, um, it's like I had to accept myself, because it was like, okay, he did not fall in love for an illusion. I could speak the most honest and the most genuinely about me, because I considered myself a problem that needs to be solved. My identity, a problem that needs to be solved. And so the identity became a disease. And fortunately for me, like, I really don't know how did, it is a miracle that I managed to get out of it, because imagine you call your identity, you have an identity crisis, because, you know, you go through certain trauma, you have an identity crisis, you don't know who you are, you're given the name of a disease right now, and you just radically accept yourself as that disease. But radical acceptance worked, because eventually it was like, accept that I can be like that. And that's that. Um, and then that acceptance and that letting go allow this gap of new behavior, new thought patterns to slowly form. And again, having Saturn in the ninth house is Saturn in the worldview house. So it's a slow and gradual change of worldview. Like, I could not ignore the evidence that I was asking a question, and then I would run into something in the literature, or run into a person, or run into what. Then I began to actually do manifestation, um, and then manifested healing. But then this is Saturn. And those of you who've seen my manifestation with the planets know that when I talk about Saturn, with Saturn you manifest, and it takes time. It still takes what Saturn has. It's dedication. And being dedicated, and times they're like a repetitive reiterating the new pattern, the new worldview, the new belief, finding the new evidence, remembering, and basically becoming a bit more optimistic, because Saturn rules also anxiety and the doom and gloom. I call it the doom and gloom. It's trying to make you realistic, but it also needs expansiveness. It also needs to see that when you ask questions, you find answers. They might not take a minute, they can take you long, but then you can actually recover. So from defining myself as a disease, and also at the time, up until the time, I was a writer. So if anybody would ask me, who am I was a writer. And when I went through this crisis, I said, okay, wait, up until then, I was writing stories, but life is not in words, in stories. There is also life, and I realized I need to heal myself and to live, not just to write, but also to live life. And so who am I? I was like, I am a writer, and I had no definition for myself. And then I had a definition. I had a new definition. I am a disease. And in 2016, with this crisis and with the Me Too crisis, it was before the Me Too. I began to speak up before the Me Too, and nothing. And it was just the time that CPTSD became acknowledging the DSM. So, and it was just, and a couple of years later, people were already talking about gaslighting commonly in my country. And it was like, okay, I got it. And I was mature enough because it was after my Saturn return already, in 2008 was before my Saturn return. My Saturn return, I went to academia, and I did finish a degree. I did have the money to finish a degree. It was not easy, not because of the studies so much, but because of the whole condition of being a student. Um, but just after, this this kind of identity, and kind of like, wait, I want to tackle this again. I want to tackle me being a woman again. I want to tackle new aspects of femininity that perhaps I did not give, of being a woman back then. Okay, so what kind of woman? And something like Marilyn Monroe and Marlene Dietrich is like my ideal woman. That is what I knew. But then I would listen to Marilyn Monroe's sexual songs, and I was like, but she doesn't sound like she's enjoying sexuality, except for maybe one song or two, um, where she did feel like sexually liberated. It was all like heartbreak and feeling like bitter. And I was like, wow, this is such a disillusionment. What happened? And, only when I was in academia, I learned, and I had a relationship coach. She said, okay, think about the woman that you like. So, Marilyn Monroe. And I began to watch Marilyn Monroe documentaries, and I realized that she was hurt in her childhood. Um, and like, even though she was like a sex idol, she did not enjoy sexuality until like nearly her last years. And I was like, wow, this is the greatest sex idol. And strangely enough, the person I had beef with in academia, that was of not only sexually harassing but trying to mind control it, his like favorite actress was Marilyn Monroe. So even in those cases where you go through a crisis, I was going through my own path, and I drew in a person that was going through their own path, and there were things that connected the two. Um, so, which was very annoying, because I was like, okay, how do I deal with that? How do I, make a change? Um, but then you know, by recent years, I was no longer a disease. And not only that, I was an activist in spreading the voice that CPTSD is not a personality disease. And I'm able to trace it back to relational trauma and even what we call narcissism. And I was one of the people who spread the knowledge about narcissistic abuse in my country, because people did not know what it is. And now I can do the refinement of say, okay, what matters is not how I attack this person. It was relational trauma. This is why they act in this way. And whether we also had relational trauma or not, we need to identify the patterns of the relation. If you look at narcissism, you always look at the pattern of relation. So it cannot be that you have a personality disorder if the problem is a pattern of relation. Um, and this is what you are warding yourself against, and I think that this is important. Um, and but the end of the day, it was like, if in 2008 the solution was to adopt an identity of a disease, as Pluto is kind of like about to leave, Capricorn, I have a more complex identity. Okay, I am. Uh, I have various aspects of gender. I have what I like to do, which is varied. I have perhaps some of my nationalities because they affected me and my worldview. I'm a human being and I don't feel such a pressure to, to answer the question, who am I? But that being said, Pluto is about to enter my 12th house. So, and in 2026, if I'm not mistaken, I'm having another eclipse right on my ascendant. And it's going to be sextile in Pluto and Uranus. So Pluto is going to be in Aquarius and Uranus, yes, I believe it's going to be. I don't know if it will be in, I hope it will not be like in the Algol thing or something. Um, it's so intense. Um, but remember, if you have, eclipses on your first and seventh house, they don't necessarily have to be as intense as mine. They can very well be a change in your life path. It can be something that is no longer serving you, being taken away. In my case, it was my identity. Okay. That was literally that. So something that is no longer serving you is being taken away and making place for the new. And ascendant is also the life path. So you need to see where the ruler of the ascendant is, where the ruler of the seventh house is, how are these rulers aspected, what's in these houses. Okay, I happen to not have any significant planet in Virgo or Pisces. When Pisces, I do have Palasatina. Okay, so imagine, the 2016 eclipse series. Tina, the woman advocate for women rights. But also she had to remember to embrace Palasatina. She's very critical um, of men, and she had to embrace the feminine. But having her in Pisces, there's not, and one of the ways is like there's nothing wrong with being a woman, nothing wrong with being the feminine, and the of like I should not be afraid to be vulnerable, and that's something I really like. That's something I really literally when I was in therapy and my therapist said, I remember this till today, your vulnerability brings out the aggressor in me, or the violent aspects in me. Um, like no, I have the right to be vulnerable. I have the right to be vulnerable. And I literally sat there and said, well, I'm going to and meet another person and then have all this drama with another person. You're going to go out and there's another patient and you're going to behave the same. How do I change that? And to look at the offender in the eyes and say, how do we grow with love? And of course, his answer was gaslighting. He was said, the only way out is through, but, and then began, to be very violent. But it's very much fighting for the yin to have a place in the world, fighting for peace, basically, fighting for the ability to be vulnerable without that to be taken abuse of. You don't have to be abused for your vulnerability. You don't have to be ashamed of being vulnerable. If you don't give vulnerability a place in the world, you're not healthy. There's something huge that you are missing. Um, and you can't grow and you can't develop. So that was a huge growth from my younger self. Um, but definitely, if something is eclipsing around your ascendant, descendant, it can be what you will change would not only be a relationship thingy or how you view relationships or a certain partnership. It doesn't have to be romantic, but it is going to be about finding yourself, defining yourself. And I come to think of Tom Jacobs, I alone define who I am. Okay? Defining yourself within it. And as I look at this painting, I think that there can be more things. I like this one too. And this is something that I would have to look deeper into because there's a huge contrast here. Um, yeah, but that was just an interesting experiment with acrylic without having any plan or technique or elaborated technique. So think about those things, and and if you know you're about to have such a thing, such an eclipse on the ascendant descendant, and it happens, it happens every 10, 12 years or so, because when the eclipses are according to the nodes, and the nodes change signs in around a year and a half, or yeah, something like that. Um, so the first eclipses on the new uh, nodal axis are like going to already when they enter your house are going to already um, make big change. And this is the first house. It happens. It's a change of something in the life path, a change of the way you show yourself to the world, an aspect in your identity that you did not show, and now you have to adjust your relationships accordingly. Again, depending on um, how are the rulers of the ascendant and the seventh aspected, what's in those houses, what's their condition, it's going to determine how will you go about with this change. Something will no longer be relevant, and then you will have to do relationships in a new way because you're doing you in a new way. Mm, 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 mm. So, yeah, and it's really important to remember there are two things about how do we define ourselves, but also whatever we define ourselves, loving towards ourselves. Because the person can say, oh, I'm mentally ill, and just love themselves. And that would be the way of loving and accepting themselves. And that would be a way to to self acceptance, to healing. Or a person's way of healing is saying, wait, 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 wait. I was the person who was the victim in the situation, and I should be afraid to be vulnerable. And it was not the problem with the way I saw reality, but the way reality was. Um, and so that definition of me being mentally ill as an identity part is simply no longer valid. Um, and and there is an understanding that what I'm coping with is something that society needs um, to change. But do notice that it doesn't mean that the person is having any sort of like mental condition or saying, "Oh, I am this ailment now." It's a phase, and it can be if it in general, if the way you define yourself helps you um, be more content, be more comfortable in your own skin, be more content with who you are, strike on a new path, or change the way you go upon your life mission, then that usually does matter, more. Um, and and you do need both to ask why and to ask how in many cases. It's because sometimes asking why did this happen to me yields certain answers that lead to certain changes that need to be made. Why did it happen? It is, in essence, is also why did it happen and how do I go out of this? Okay, what were the components that were involved in the creation of this situation? Where can I interfere and put my best foot forward so that now my life and my overall sense of, content and well-being um, will be rejuvenated. So if you ask why and it doesn't lead to anywhere good, it is good to start asking how do I want, let's say I want to be happy, want to be safe. I want to be safe to be vulnerable with people. How do I change that? How do I do that? And so on. So yeah, that is something that we need to consider. If you had an you probably had eclipses on your first house, you can go to astroseek.com and look at your chart, and there's also a way to look at eclipses. So there's a list of eclipses, solar and lunar, and you can see the axis. If you see where your ascendant is and what sign it is, the opposite sign is the seventh house, and you can see that that acts as an axis. So the eclipses are going to be on this axis, and you want to take note that what happened to you during those eclipse cycles on your first and seventh house. If you have ascendant in Taurus or in Scorpio, you are experiencing it this year. Okay, the previous eclipse season and the coming eclipse season, you are experiencing uh, huge, tremendous changes to the way you go about your life mission, or maybe your life mission will be exposed to you, or maybe the next phase will be exposed to you. And you also go about a huge, tremendous change in your relationship. So you can, let's say you begin to channel, okay, this happened to me. I lost a person that I knew for 10 years, not only because of that, but one of the things that scared him was like that I um, began to channel, and I took this very seriously, and I asked everything. I was doing experiments, so you learn something new, you're immersing yourself in it. And they were very, very afraid. They could not deal with that. That I have access, although they were spiritual and they were channeling as well, they could not deal with that. And I was connecting to divinity or divine energy with the interruptions, right? In channeling, they could not deal with that. And but if this happens in your, first and seventh, and you see, channeling, now you become, let's say, a channeler or a medium or whatnot, and up until then you were living with a certain person, and now they can't take it anymore, or you find things that make you, or you changes your worldview, or it changes you, or maybe you were living with a person who's atheist, or maybe you were living with someone who can't, like, or maybe it deepens your connection. Maybe something in your connection has to go. You go through the deep transformation, um, and then the way you do relationship is different. Something is taken. It can be a relationship that is taken or business partnership that is taken, but something in the way you relate and the way you are doing you is shifting. This is also true about where the houses where your sun is, because sun is identity. Um, but when it comes, sun is identity, my personality. Okay, but the ascendant is not just my personality or the way I show myself to the world, the way I define myself. Which again, the way I define myself is very solar plexus, but it's like It's not just the way I define myself, it's also what I came here to do. And that has a very strong connection to how I present myself to others, or what do people see when they see me. Can have a very strong connection to what I came here to do. Of course, the midheaven is about life mission, um, but the ascendant and the ruler of the ascendant matter very well about how are you going to go through this life mission? How are you going to pursue your life mission? Or even when are you going to pursue your life mission? And and the path. It's not just life mission. It's just life path. What what did you came here to explore? What did you came here to explore? For those who view things as lessons, what the lessons that you came here to learn? What are the lessons that you came here to learn, and so on and so forth. Um, when the path that is letting go. But how do you find your okay in you when you are learning to let go? But you do. Um, with Scorpio, Taurus, it can be, you know, the cliche life that is deeply psychological, or thriving and surviving. Okay, something in your life path about the relation between thriving and surviving. So you could be also, you know, either activist in human rights, and you can say, okay, what is, you know, the nature nurture, but also, um, do I strive in my life? How much of my life path do I strive to provide for the people who are helpless? And how much of my life do I strive to inspire people to thrive? And then how do I help those who are helpless in a way that inspires them to thrive without, you know, stranded, without them feeling stranded and, you know, abandoned, but also um, without creating the over dependency on me, but not turning that into gaslighting. So let's say, you know, you're a healer or a social worker or whatnot, and you place a certain system, and then a person cannot, simply cannot stand those survivalistic fields. So, you know, to tell them, oh, I don't want to create dependencies. I will not allow, I will not help you to find food, or, you know, I will not help you to find a job that actually fits you. Then this is, you know, this is misuse. But then there are cases where a person is overly relying on you, and you sometimes need to back and to his back. And sometimes the best way is not to focus on the other, as Scorpio does a lot, but to focus on what are your boundaries, what can you give, what is in your give. Okay, what is in my boundaries to give the people who are helpless? What is now beyond my boundaries to give? Because otherwise I'm not them up, I'm dragging them, I'm being dragged down with them, which is also a lesson for Pisces Virgo, because Pisces Virgo can also be very much the healer. Okay, and Pisces can be a lot about the because it's oneness and needing to feel close and up close and intimate, emerging literally, and Taurus, it can be about, you know, nourishing and sex. Um, so how do you look at sexuality? We, I think, you know, I have a friend with son um, in Scorpio, and they were doing like sexuality. They were speaking to me about like porn, and kind of like the shame people have around watching porn. So perhaps in this time they can discover more about the industry, or maybe they've been consuming their, not saying, I'm not pointing out anyone, maybe like, where have they been consuming their porn? Or maybe they can find something, shocking about the industry, or maybe there are new aspects of their gender that show up in sexuality, or new kinks, or whatnot. But also, they can think that something they thought was terrible because it is shameful in terms of religion. Now I went to the other side that it's like, oh, wait, we should not change this and this and this and this and this. And then they found out, no, it's not shameful because of religion, it's shameful because of sexual violence. And I did not know that sexual violence also reached this, supposedly feminine porn or something like that. Or the other way around, it can also be a signal of a person saying, oh, wait, there is this industry that is sexual, but it's actually respectful. Um, we also see like the provocation around, if I think about mundane, the provocation around OnlyFans, and people's kind of exposing now that it is an MLM, because the way that people recruit other people. So, let's say you have, one of the ascendants in Taurus or in Scorpio, and you've been an OnlyFans producer. And now you realize that there was a bit of a halo around this industry. That no, you're not going to end up on TikTok with that fancy car, but what you are going to cope with is a lot of people sexually harassing you, thinking that this is your job to replay them nicely. And maybe the fact that you've even been choosing to do OnlyFans is because you wanted to, empower yourself sexually, and kind of was working with your body and, loving your body. And then you said, oh, what not? I will spread the news. But then you find out that no, it's not about sexually empowering industry, but actually it's an MLM, and there is, a financial mechanism that does not empower creators or content creators. And so is not actually respectful. Um, Anything more when I think about it? I should probably do a separate video. I think I did. I mentioned that. Let's say you're a Taurus, ascendant again, it can be the same thing. Um, and it can be that also the way you treat senses. Taurus is about the senses, and with Scorpio, you can get kind of extrasensory. So perhaps a certain aspect of yourself, or your channels certain aspects of yourself. Um, you can get extrasensory, and then that defines you, and then depending on where the rulers are, maybe it's something to do with your profession. Or maybe you become extrasensory, and then let's say, I don't know, you have an astral affair with someone, if it's one of the rulers in your seventh house, and you're like, oh, I became extrasensory, now I have this lover that I'm not sure is my husband or my wife or whatnot. Um, and so you need to look at relations. So how do I define monogamy? Or so how do I define what relationship style I want? Or but it can also be, the crisis you know, depending on what's happening. Eclipses, they take something away that no longer serves and no longer serves the path that you came here to do. Okay? Um, and some beliefs that you have, some ways you've been going out and presenting yourself, some way you've been doing relationships is outdated. And you need, also, yeah, it's outdated. Also, when for me, the way I've been doing internet was like with the nickname, I was recording my music with black screen. I've posted photos only to trusted friends. Then I opened Facebook in, I think, 2008, 2009, and I already had my face and my name. I wouldn't have also my name. Yeah, on Facebook, a lot of us have our real names. It's not the way we've been doing internet. And certain apps, even the blue V, you also are required to show an identification certificate. Okay, so the way of, and for me, the ruler of the seventh is Mercury, also the way we present ourselves on social media. Um, so yeah, in this on this platform. So that can be another thing that comes up. How do you present yourself to the world? May very well change. Well, I think I spoke a lot about eclipses, and I'm going to explore more about eclipses soon. So let me know where is your ascendant, and what sign, where is the ruler, if you know rulership, and when were eclipses on your sign, how were you affected? You can check it by astrosig.com and try to think back to those years. And you can even respond with the video. If you have a video that you upload that you're doing that, I'm very much okay with your responding either here in the comments or on Twitter. I'm Tali Share on Twitter, Youngblood on Instagram, with the link to your video. They used to have, back in the days, they used to have video responses, but they don't have video responses anymore. So you could have like a reaction video, or you can tell your story, and we can, put the links to them. And I promise I'll make the time to watch, if it's not like a ton of videos, I'll make the time so we can have like a little community of people sharing their own experiences and kind of learning together. Because there's something very centering in learning astrology itself, and sharing our personal experiences, um, rather than analyzing just celebrities, or even analyzing celebrities. Like, analyze yourself before or while you analyze other people, because there's a ton of information. However long you've been living, you can look back and you can find things, and it can be basis for your autobiography. It doesn't mean that people should study only themselves, um, but it's definitely healthy to take a look at these things, because astrology is going to help you navigate a lot of things in life. And if you don't want to be dependent on paying, for me, I take $50 for a reading currently. But you could be paying, hundreds of dollars for just a reading for, let's say, 45 minutes. And there is a lot you can get in those 45 minutes, but it's significantly not anywhere near your ability to slowly but gradually look at your own chart, um, and be the authority. Because when you do a reading, there will always be a filter. If I give you channeling, there will always be a filter, whether I'm aware of it or not. And if I am not the filter, then there can be interruption in in the hotline. um, and you need to have your own kind of way, whether it's astrology or human design, um, to some extent, maybe psychology, that you can tap into, or certain channeling practice if you practice ethically and you know how to do it. Um, and always understand that with the other person, look, if I only said this was my clip story, and I told you what happened without letting you in on how the rulers are aspected and how is it in context, you would think that an eclipse on your first and seventh house is like something to be fearful of, or something tremendously, scary. No, no, this was my story. And I also told you why this is my story. Where are the planets? Most of my planets are retrograde. I have a mystic rectangle. I have the ruler of, my seventh and fourth house opposition in Pluto. I have, like a stellium in Scorpio retrograde. So of course my stories are going to be more like deeply psychological, or psychic or energetic or whatnot. Um, doesn't have to be your story. And when you learn the astrology, bit by bit, um, you learn the significations of something, and then you can also learn, the shadow and the light of the significations. And you can also begin to understand of how can you try to work with certain energies, because there is a lot you can do. Um, so yeah, there is a lot you can do. Um, for example, for me, I know Saturn is in my 12th house. I know the eclipses are on my third and ninth houses. So obviously something changing in the way that I do vlogs, in the way that I do social media. Something's changing in that which I don't know, that I don't know about me, that is the 12th. There's also the spiritual and psychic and level of healing, mental health sometimes. Um, I know all these things. Okay, I know Mars in my Gemini house. I have the fourth house in Gemini, so I'm drawing. I'm I'm doing experiments with with painting and um, at home, or trying something new at home, being experimental. My natal Mercury is in Aries, so it's a Mars rule sign. Um, I think I did Mars in Gemini. I'm not sure if I did a Mars in Gemini, or I tried to do a Mars in Gemini. Anyway, I'll see you in my next video. Bye.